All right, which one of you's been battling for top cricket? Almost sounds like all you all are crabs in a bucket trying to get to the top of the cricketdom. And that ain't gonna work. I keep saying that every week, and every week it seems to be continuing. And the progress, such that it is, and not the progressive, but the progress is very slow, but it is there, and that should be an indication that we need help. Those of us that are trying to work on this problem, being taken over and run down by a bunch of lunatics. Literally the inmates are running the asylum now. And these are the criminally insane. And we really have to, I can't imagine that we're not thinking that we like to live in a world like that. It certainly isn't what I was thinking when I was growing up. However inculcated I ended up being, it certainly didn't stick, and therefore there's a little bit of hope. I'm hoping that way, and I just keep holding out. The more of you will be stepping up, and my thoughts turn right now as I say that. And someone who has been stepping up, Jules over at UCY, I understand had a health emergency, dire health emergency. I don't have much to go on with it, so I'm going to just leave it right there. That I hope. My thoughts and prayers have been with her for a few days. I noticed that the UCY went down for a couple days, and the YouTube, their YouTube account stopped updating. So apparently she does all that by hand. A lot of work to do. I used to do it a long time ago. That hand work on working stuff up, not even to YouTube, but to try and keep the broadcast network on at. Was it Revolution Broadcasting, the first place I started, when they had problems with there, and I was doing remote programming of their network to keep it up, just to keep up for a year, trying to hopefully we could pull it back together. You know, that didn't happen. But I'd like to extend my thoughts and prayers to Jules, and I want to offer something. Anybody who can get this to her, maybe JJ might be able to have a better connection than if I understand he has a faster connection, maybe, that you get the word to him. It's not to do, again, everything I'm offering is not to substitute what the doctors will be giving her. She's in an emergency condition. This is, I think, where Western medicine can probably do the best. It didn't keep her from getting there, but they might be able to have her, help her in the moment of the emergency. But there's something called, that I want you to know about, and I've been looking into it. I haven't had a ton of time to really focus on it, but I'm looking more and more interested in it. Something called Serrapeptase. It's Serrapeptase. It's very, very interesting, and it works in your blood system on tissue and clots and arterial plaque and inflammation. It's an enzyme, and it needs to be looked at. I think it's not something you use as a supplement. It has to be used as more of a therapy. You have to take enough of it to do something in your in your veins and arteries. But I would ask her to consider this, again, not an exclusion of or on top of or in derogation to anything she's being told right now in the emergency, but look into, and all y'all who have a history of potential heart problems or all these things, that arterial problems, vascular problems, consider looking at that. I'm not saying it's an end-all be-all, but it sure has a big amount of information that's very powerful in what it does. Serrapeptase. Anyway, I want to extend that as possible help to bring her from the brink. Once she gets off the precipice, then we'll bring her from the brink, utilizing things that might help us. And it just so happens I've been looking at this for a few weeks. Just happened to come across doing some research on something else. It popped up. I started studying it. It looks pretty interesting. So I wish her a lot of wish her health right now. As I've been saying, without your health, you got nothing. As soon as she went down, UCY went down. So we would lose our voice right there for those of us as hosts. And those of you as listeners, it doesn't take very much to break this wonderful connection we have to the interwebs to be able to put the message out. Rob works in RLM chat, yes, Serrapeptase. There's 2 R's in that. As we move, and this could happen to anybody anytime. And again, anything that I just start thinking back, even the late William Roberts, gone, right? So all your information's gone. And this is what happens if we don't have people picking up the baton. These folks that are doing this to us are waiting for us to die, folks. That's all I can tell you. They want the memory gone. They want whatever memory you have and whatever skills you have to alter these things done with. They want you done, and they're holding their breath that you don't figure out something that triggers the mass population to preserve that so-called liberty that we were told, Thomas Jefferson told us, is required to do. And so, this is, every day you wonder if it's your final day at some point. Those of us getting older and older, you start realizing that it's not really a thought that you will or you won't. It's just that will be it, right? I mean, there's nothing more there. And this is not even maybe a point where if, in this case, she just gets Jules may be incapacitated. Now, I understand that she did come back into chat, so something was very good there as far as the condition, but it doesn't mean that she will continue, and it doesn't mean that she could. And so we get these diminished capacities as well. As I've been telling you, too, that's an obvious one, and the less obvious one is the feed they give you, the pharmaceuticals they put you on, and the things that they do to change they're not telling us they change our DNA. And they're making us the technocratic biobots that they want in the future. It's been written. I mean, this has been in the news. It's not even fantasy no more. It's happening. And so the last few of us that are around on this last bit of memory they need to have gone, are getting on to the point where we're not going to be here to be that example or that memory. And so I ask you again, anybody who's willing to step up and has something that you really can say. Really, not like what I heard Corbett talk on his borders thing last. Again, it was a repeat because it was not a reprogram, but there was so much nonsense in what they're talking about, the open border, closed border. No context in any of the terms they invent. No prerequisites that are added to this. Nothing in context of historic prerequisites as well at all. We talk about new things without any knowledge at all or foundation. That has to stop. I mean, it just has to stop. If it doesn't, we're just walking into the new future that has been planned. I keep telling you the guy with a plan is going to win. And most of you all that are thinking you know and training and not listening behind the woodshed and getting those principles are going to walk yourself right into the day that is planned for you, no matter how you think you are a critical thinker. Because you really are. We're all telling ourselves stories. And so those of us that are trying to put the word out and get reorient people, try to get people understanding what there is. It's not just identifying the corruption. It seems to be everywhere for all history. It's identifying what corruption is really destroying your way of life and the way you live and the society that you agree with. Again, nothing's perfect, so there's not going to be an expectation that there won't be a complaint. But to throw it all out, like we say, the euphemism, I suppose, the baby out with the bathwater. Bathwater's so dirty you didn't see the baby you threw out, the precious baby you throw out with it. And that's what I think I see going on now. I think I see it. I do see it. I see a lot of it. And from my perspective on, if we get to the law of the land, that requires property, requires a law, as we see the prerequisites of history, of mankind working amongst himself or herself, and the fact that we aren't such a cool, we're not such a cool people. We have these really big failures, and we don't seem to appreciate the power of the failure, how easy it is to fall into, and how it's just so simple and so cozy to fall into something less. As I think about it, and I better say it because I think I missed it last week, for those of you on Prodcast and Pastcast, and hopefully we'll get recast here on UCY, this will be BTW RLM 221. For those of us, I just got this on the Twitter, those of us that have been kind of bringing the word forward, the information we can. There's a little thing came through. I'm not sure what any of you all think about any of these people. To me, is the message proper enough? Is what I look at anymore. Oliver Stone takes over awards, exposes warmongering two-party paradigm. And so anybody exposing the two-party paradigm, whether all they are is psychopaths, so whether they're warmongering or just hurting little kittens, it doesn't really matter. They're a psychopathic caucustocracy. We put it in the two-party paradigm. That to me was a call to me directly. What have I told you that we did in 2013? I'll say it in a moment if you haven't heard before and you're first tuning in. Thank you very much. But there's a little report you can get in the Blogcaster where Oliver Stone, who just actually did a documentary apparently with Putin over in Russia, he got criticized for that as well. He was doing a speech at the Writers Guild Awards, and he went and made some interesting comments about this two-party system that really isn't. It's just an illusion. This two-party is really the same kind of thing. As he says, call it what you will, the military-industrial security money media complex. It's a system that has been perpetrated under the guise that these are just wars justifiable in the name of our flag we fly so proudly over our lives. So again, as I've been telling you, watch the titles. It doesn't matter what you call this. It's either a crime against you or it's not. You can give it all kinds of titles. You can focus on a part of the title. It won't matter. You either step up and arrest the crime and the felony against you, or it's going to take you down. And even so, he admits to another thing, and I don't know anything about Oliver Stone, and I'm not that versed on movies as well, although I think he does those. I think he's well known for them. Tells you how much I really paid attention to all that. Folks, really, I mean, since the 90s, I just went away, and I never really looked back again, and I lost most of my memory before that. So I don't have some of the things I would like to have anymore, but I have new things, and new things I think are much more powerful, much more focused, and a lot less cluttered than I think some people that didn't go through what I've seen or not seen now. But he concluded with advice based on his own experience, and so we'll listen a little bit what he says here. And I suppose, based on the tenor, he's telling us the truth about this. I've fought these people who practice war for most of my life. It's a tiring game, and mostly you'll get your ass kicked. With all the criticism and insults you receive, and the flattery too, it's important to remember, if you believe in what you're saying and what you can stay the course, you can make a difference. And I can't tell you how much I can't, there's no place in that I don't think I can argue with. That's what I found. So at that point, I believe this guy is telling these people the truth, and he's telling us the truth. And that's why I'm telling you. There's just another confirmation. You just can't sit back and let these people win. You just can't. It's a war. It's a war, and these people are going to kick your ass. And then when I saw that happening, I said, okay, well, I'm going to have to develop my own way behind the woodshed, and I'll beat their ass. Mark on the beast. I'll put a mark on the beast. You can too, but it takes you doing that. And you can expect to have a fight. I mean, this is what it's about. It's us versus them. And if you don't do anything about it, they win. That's just the way this thing works. That just shows you the human frailty, if you will. Well, our animal nature doesn't rise above. And any excuse made not to address that animal nature in others against us, these psychopaths, they win. I don't know what else to say. It's a broken record at that point. And I think I hear Sony coming out with new vinyl pressing. So, maybe we have a little bit longer life. So he goes on to say, I urge you to find a way to remain alone with yourself. Listen to your silences, not always in the writer's room. Try to find not what the crowd wants so you can be successful, but try instead to find the true inner meaning of your life here on earth. Never give up on your heart in your struggle for peace, decency, and telling the truth. Again, there's nothing in that I can really argue with. I may have said it a little bit differently, but I'm not talking to a bunch of writers here. I do try to speak to you all listeners to try and get people to understand how the importance of what we're doing. But that's really difficult. And so I just keep, as you hear me say, periodically readjusting. I'm just going to go make up what I need to make up to try and get the word out and hope someone hears it. It's the only thing I can do. I really can't speak to any of you. I try to impress you with the importance, and it settles sometimes and turns into action, and a lot of the other times it doesn't. But I'm going to continue. There's just something. I'm going to continue the truth I understand in what I've read. Try to identify, not to the point of destruction, but identify those that are giving us information that just don't have it. They just don't have the foundation, even though they're known for being they're known for passing information that seems to be good. And I can tell you, like in the last border, non-border information from the Corbett report that I just heard off of UCY, those two people had no clue. They're throwing everything out that you ought to understand before. Then they started venting stuff. Maybe the guy Corbett does some stuff that's good. I assume he does. But I've seen some product that he puts out, in particular his oligarchy, which I thought was brilliant. The term was brilliant. But he missed a whole... He took something that happens in mineral production, as I identified to you then. I'll say it again. He had no understanding of the reality of how we get minerals from the land into your hands. And he used that thing apparently he doesn't know about as the cause to vilify someone who understood that and utilized it at the time and became very successful at bringing oil to you, and then was smart enough to make it go beyond. And remember, our fallen nature is not far behind on how do I keep my monopoly going, since that's our society. I mean, how do I keep control of this thing that I've now, and this is my intellectual property. This is my ability to pull this together where no one else could, where the man was the first to find how to get that there was oil at all to find, and find in substantial ways. That man wasn't able to take it to the next level. Another man was. In this case, they were two men, not a woman, not to disparage that. But there's a whole missing point about a reality in mankind's travel. And I'm hearing a big disconnect, and I think, not that I know, I absolutely know, because when we put the disconnect in what we do, it falls on its face. I know if we don't get the foundation of what has been the prerequisite, the requirements of us to be here and talk even what we're talking, we have to know what they are. We can't make those up. We can't divorce them, we can't throw them away, and we can't just invent stuff without, what are you inventing? It's like a little kid trying to invent something more advanced than their capacity. It's like someone who has no capacity. I say capacity in the sense of being obligated to their word, in other words, their contract. You can't put that on someone that has nothing in them yet to do that. Like we have generalized that let's say a 12 to 14-year-old, and in some cases it goes to 18. You have no capacity to make a contract. Why? Because there's really nothing in you that you can be held to, because you don't have an awareness. You just don't. And so this is what I'm talking about. There's prerequisites in mankind that are being thrown out right now by lots of people. And I really am only speaking to my subject matter as comprehensive as it will be, because it deals in everything of the land that you use to make us who we are. It gives us the place to say there's a border, and we made those borders because we found out, no different, if you will, the castle, it gets attacked. And there we are. There's our failure right there. Stop attacking ourselves. Let's get out of this. Again, as he says here, let's make peace. Let's figure out how to do that. I mean, for sure, not as a cover for another crime, as we see. But I think I found the picture for you all that won't do anything. Watch a giant spider devour a cricket on a man's hand. Is a little link you can get. It's one of those big giant spiders they have down under. and I don't remember now which one it is. It's on cricketfresh.in. Pretty funny stuff here, although it's not so. The cricket's not liking that too much, that big old spider on that man's hand, but I thought this was pretty interesting. You got the cricket being devoured by the eight-legged monster, no more different than the tentacled beast we see referenced in older cartoons for the government devouring everybody, and it's on a man's hand. The creation of the man it stands on, which I thought was kind of neat. I just wanted to pass that along. But keep it up, crickets. You're going to become devoured by that tentacled beast, that many-legged beast, and possibly and rightly so, because you had the opportunity to not be the cricket. I want to revisit something. It's a giant spider. We got to go to a big one coming. I wanted to touch base again. I might have made a mistake a few months ago. Nothing big deal, just to cause your attention to it, because it's now becoming news, and all of a sudden everyone gets focused on this stuff that happens. And I told you it was kind of coming, and I want you to just not look past it, because it could be important if you live in the area. But it's a natural dynamic, it seems. Big one coming. Northern California shaken by more than a dozen earthquakes. I wanted to take this opportunity to make a potential correction. I never went back to listen to myself, but I think I made a statement error. But it's not so much an error. I just want to call your attention to it. There's a lot of shaking going on in California. And I told you earlier in the year that all this rain after the drought was going to charge the hydrologic process, the hydrologic system underneath the ground, not the rivers and not the dams. So this story comes out and talks about the dams and the rivers and all that stuff, and it says that they're not a factor, and it doesn't go on further. I would use this to remind me, to tell you that I believe that what we're hearing now in California is now this, and it came right around right after the hottest weather that they've been starting to have. I believe this is the hydrologic gurgling that's going through the deep rocks of the moisture going from the mountains to the down through the aquifer. And I suspect this is what we're seeing. It's not something to disregard, but as long as it's happening, it's actually pretty natural. But what I told you, I think, was watch out for August, and that would be the error I want to correct, although hesitantly so. What I meant was October. I think I said we would see potentially bigger earthquakes in October, but I didn't know how, because of this drought, how wide that window would be, which could take up to August. So if you remember what I said, and I said August earlier, I meant October, but that wouldn't necessarily keep any month out after July, August. See, we're coming into it right now, another month and a half. 2 months, the start of it, but it's in about the middle, it may start the middle. But here we are, the gurgling, I think, of the hydrologic cycle we're here in California, and it starts doing earthquakes. It's how I took the story. No one tells you that in the story, but I wanted to reference that to correct my error. So another, talk about giant and big and monstrous buffoonery coming on. I want to recall here this thing I've been focusing on here the last few weeks about the terrorists is us. Terrorists are us. It's the United States. It's the coalition. We're the plague. These people are just incorrigible, if in the minimum. They're psychopaths. No holds barred on how insane that they will make stuff. And I hope you didn't miss this, but I want to make sure that you don't. This actually came out of the mouth of the psychopaths in Washington, right after they were claiming that Syria would commit another chemical attack. Another chemical attack hasn't been proven. Not one attack has been proven, and yet they're backing up these claims on the unproven non-chemical attacks that were done by Syria, the government, which have been more likely shown to be done by the rebels that the terrorists are supporting in a mercenary payment. Comes this lunacy on top of saying that there was going to be a chemical attack by Syria from the terrorists themselves, the United States and Israel and Britain and France and all these other, and the coalition. They came up with this story that Syria reportedly pulls back from launching a new chemical attack after they were purportedly outed by the U.S. for committing the next one based on the fact of the occurrences of chemical attacks by Syria in the past. Again, that Syria is said by these terrorists to have pulled back from launching the new terror attack because they outed them. The United States outed them. It's got to be the height of lunacy. I have to continually to tell you, if they're willing to do it to Syria and those people and continue their license, if you will, their cover for murder, they'll do it to you. You just can't look past this nonsense. It means something to you. It's not in Syria. It's happening wherever these psychopaths touch, have a discussion of an action they can do or an authority someone can refer to that these people make. These Republicans and these Democrats, what Oliver Stone said was it was just a look past the paradigm. Remember, the Republican and Democratic Party, we sued in 2013. We sued them for treason, folks. Line 140 on the complaint. You've made war on the laws of the United States. Folks, they didn't answer. They defaulted. They are committing war. They're committing war on the laws of the United States. That's your life. These Republicans and Democrats are committing treason. It's way beyond. And I hear crickets on this. It's astonishing to me. These people are then blaming others for doing nothing. And they take credit for it. They take credit for calling it out. They take credit for calling out what wasn't going to happen. It's fascinating. And I tried, I guess I'm not a comedian. I wish I was, but I was. I tried to do a little bit of joke. Impliedly in here on Twitter, I responded to that to Barman. Remember, Barman's a bot. Now I know Grimner's back there, but so that was part of the joke. But I responded to this statement that Syria was reportedly pulling back from launching a new chemical attack that they never were committing to do, that based on something they've never done, only stated by the terrorist, was reminded me of the statement that I responded to Barman on Twitter. Good deciding to stop beating your wife, Barman. It didn't seem to get any coverage on that. I thought it was pretty funny. This is the old inference of you're a vile creature, and just by a statement, and everyone believes it, and you can't wipe that off, and you aren't even capable of doing it. The Barman's a bot. He can't even have a wife. You can't be beating something he doesn't have, or it, or she. I don't know. I never asked Grimner whether or not Barman was anything. That's interesting, isn't it? So, this is what the psychopaths in the United States do. They say, have you stopped beating your wife on something you don't even have a wife. In this case, you can't. Barman's a bot. At least the name is. And this is what we've accepted. We've allowed these psychopaths to actually put this out without condemnation. And all I can tell you, crickets, is you're going to be facing that spider. I'm going to tell you, you got to see that spider. These things are big. And that's the government that will go about and make these stories up on impossibilities. And everybody picks it up. I'm stunned. I'm stunned. So, my bit of humor didn't fly so well, but I still think it's important to recover that for you, because that's exactly what's going on anymore. Anybody makes an allegation to anyone, against anyone, they happen to be an authority. Now you're tainted with that. And no one seems to stop to look and say, that's completely impossible. Now how do I relate that to Syria? Well, there's 2 or 3 organizations that have shown and proven Syria has no chemical weapons. And why would Syria use chemical weapons anyway when they're making such great progress? And this always comes up when they are making even more progress against the terrorists, the mercenaries that the United States terrorists is paying to be the mercenary. And yet we absorb this and agree that the United States and the coalition, the plague, had the right to claim that Syria could make an attack, and then based on the instance of that assertion was then Syria decided to not make the attack, taking credit. I'm being told by Grimner that Barman has no wife. I never wrote him one, so now I know he's male, and I know he's not married, and I don't think he could be. He's a bot. So, thank you, Grimner. But anyway, the point is that, this is that assertion, have you stopped beating your wife? This is what the terrorists are doing against Syria, to make it look like there was something, and then Syria says, well, I'm not going to beat my wife no more. Right? I mean, it's just nonsense when they don't have a wife. This is nonsense what we do, and we accept it. We don't call it out. We don't attack the people that are pulling these things out, like, let's say, the psychopath Nikki Haley. I can't, this woman needs to check herself in to a mental hospital, and they need to hold her. They need to put her away for a while and keep her checked on it, because she is a lunatic in an office. What they say has great sway because they have the power to hurt and kill people. This is what it's reduced to. And this is why I want to point to you, this extrajudicial thing that we keep talking about, I keep bringing up to you, shows we're beyond, folks, and we weren't supposed to get beyond. The people were required to maintain and preserve that liberty, so-called. I know I have trouble with that liberty, don't get lost in it. We could work that out in a bit larger discussion. It's this way of life that is actually and can be provable to be better than any other society in the world. It's been co-opted and it's been destroyed. And we've allowed that there's been techniques and studies. These psychopaths study you to know you better than yourself. And then they utilize your weaknesses that maybe you don't even know. As I've explained to you, is silent weapons for quiet wars. And the protocols of the elders of Zion is the manual for explaining to you that someone knows that and then can create a system for you to plug into, and you will. They know how to do it. Going on with this, there's propaganda going back and forth and trying to keep this. And in one regard, I really could care less about all this, because we're dealing with psychopaths wherever we go, wherever we live in the United States. They're local to each one of us, and I've got my handful. But I like to look and see what are the toppest level psychopaths. What is their techniques and how do they work? And we know that propaganda is one of our weaknesses. We can be lied to and we can believe it. There's lots of techniques about putting that. Something came through, an article that was, I've referenced it before. I'm not going to say a judgment here. I'm just going to point out they might have fallen into a problem. And you'll see the link. I won't even call them out. But they said that U.S. retreats from Al-Tanf and gives up on occupying southeast Syria. And I took note of that because I was telling you that we know the terrorists, because the United States is a terrorist, because they went into that area and they didn't leave when there was no terrorists. They should have given that area over to the Syrian government back. Just, okay, we got rid of the terrorists here. We're moving out. We're going to go help you somewhere else. But the United States didn't. That defined them as a terrorist. I looked at this initial story and I said, oh, they must have been listening behind the woodshed, and they're getting rid of one more evidence that the United States is a terrorist. That the United States was retreating from Al-Tanf. Well, I went and looked around and I didn't find any other substantiation for that. In fact, it makes no sense, to tell you the truth, and that's why I started looking. So I want to put this link in to show you that even somebody that I think has a good insight on these issues and calling out to you, I'm wondering, we got to still be careful on even however quality this information might be. They can still incorporate errors, and I don't know now why we would be told that the United States will retreat from Al-Tanf, and they have not. And there's nobody I can find that can confirm this report. And the United States has done some other things on top of that that shows that they're a terrorist. The United States government is the terrorist. And so, again, the website I have to now be careful. I got to, again, be careful of the information that you get. Be able to go work out, improve whatever you can find. As I tell you here, even behind the woodshed, go find what I'm showing you. Go out and research beyond, and make sure you have quality references, that you're not just making stuff up and picking up someone else's fabrications. Get a foundation. So on the moving along, as I've been trying to bring us, and I told you it's accelerating on me. I come once a week, but the world goes pretty fast, so I'm having a hard time keeping ahead of the news that you're going to hear next week, and maybe it used to be like 2 months ahead. Now it's down to the week. Sure enough, I finally came out. I'm not going to let this go out anymore. I've got to tell you, so I have it on the record for me that the United States and the coalition, the United States is a terrorist. The coalition's a plague. I wanted that on the record, and I told you one of the reasons why was that this situation about how this works and why you don't go against the terrorists as the United States is it's not much different than this constitutional power of the letter of marque and reprisal. The letter of marque was the ability for a privateer to go out in the name of the government and take out other things, typically in a military, but they were pirates, essentially legalized pirates. And then this little report comes up, and not even a few days after, and I think Grimner pointed this out to me, and he passed this on to, I think, someone else, Luke Rudowski, who never responded on it. But this came out of Zero Hedge. Why Congress won't agree to stop arming terrorists. This is one of the shortest stories I've ever seen out of Zero Hedge. But it was stated back, apparently in some while back, by any measure, the United States has long used terrorism. In 78 and 79, the Senate was trying to pass a law against international terrorism. In every version they produced, the lawyers said the United States would be in violation. In other words, for all this time, the United States has always been the terrorist. And not different than, in my mind, that the letters of marque, you cannot even, the United States can't outlaw or sign a treaty that would forbid piracy, because that's what that is. And so if you don't understand this constitutional thing and what it really was and what it does, and look at it from couple different angles, you're missing a whole lot, a ton of stuff on how to orient yourself in properly understanding what is and what isn't. What I find interesting at the very end of this very short statement was how pathetic and how hypocritical is that they talked about the Stop Arming Terrorist Act that Tulsi Gabbard was putting together, and there was only so much support. They actually touched on the same story about that I did last week, and he says, how pathetic and hypocritical is that? Well, that statement only comes from somebody that doesn't understand that it's not hypocritical, that's the law, and or you're being ruled by psychopaths. So it's not hypocritical. It's actually consistent. You just have to look through your prejudice that you think that the government does right, that the government has actually got a white hat here. Again, it doesn't surprise me anymore. I don't know if I appreciate how little I put on the value of what I see to really have to talk about it. This is a normal for a criminal organization. There's nothing hypocritical about this. It's not, the only thing pathetic is not them, it's us. It's us not stopping it. That's what's pathetic. And so Zero Hedge, the author, and they come under a pseudonym called George Washington. George don't get it. George misses the whole point. And he was the one that was the first president, or the 8th president, I guess it is in actuality, of the United States as it was finally established. Since he starts the process, he was the one that understood and agreed to the piracy. He doesn't understand this George Washington? Then he doesn't understand. It's not a surprise. But there's concurrence of what I said last week, and thank you, Grimner, for passing that on, because it was just like saying the same thing. And they used another point to prove out to us, what I said, and that their finding was they've confirmed that the United States uses terrorism. So if it's going to use it out there, folks, it's using it on you. And we were supposed to not allow that. That's, I guess, the thing that just flabbergasts me now that I've seen it, and now for years I've been talking about it over and over in different ways. And I don't think that anybody at Zero Hedge listens behind the woodshed, but it's sure interesting how a lot of these articles come out and they're speaking on the subject matter that I have presented for years. It's whether by independent awareness or by this voice, people are coming to the point. But you see, the limitation was one of not understanding, and this is where I get to you. You can hear this information. Do you actually know how to use it? Do you know it's in play? This is not a question. This stuff is in play. Your wrong opinion about that stuff that's in play is going to get you hurt, or you're going to be inert to stopping it, and it's going to win. And so I'm asking everybody to get that better awareness and then start to work on how you get after it. I'm now reminded about a colleague of mine. He got himself into a court case with a property right. He's got all the property rights. And this is what I do for us as my colleague. This is my part with my colleagues, is that I go through the tactics and strategies of the processes, and I use those to defeat the criminal on the official criminal on the other side. My colleague presented a case in law on the land of the law, and this bureau rat wouldn't go for it. Well, here, even though knowing the law was right, there was a deficiency in understanding the process that's being done against them. So this is where I keep telling you, it's not just knowing a thing, it's knowing how to use a thing and how to go against those that are the criminal in your life, that look like the official felon. And so this is happening today, even amongst us. It's not over. There's a criminal around every corner, it seems, more likely than not, even though I'd rather see that we live in peace and everybody's respectful of each other, and law rules, not rule of law, not rule o law. It's not the rule of the law, it's the law. It's not someone's interpretation as applied through their reflexive knee-jerk reactions and this SWJ thing, that social justice warrior thing we got imposed upon us. No, this is not the rule of law, this is law. And you're up against the rule of law when you're up against these usurpers. And so there's not just knowing it is enough, because the criminal doesn't care about the law. There's a law not to rob a bank. They're robbing the bank. You think another law is going to stop them? No. There's going to be processes and remedies that's going to have to help. And that's what I keep telling you. The more you don't do this, the more remedies are pulled away from us. And eventually they'll just disappear. And so back to this misunderstanding with this George Washington article on Zero Hedge, and talking about the way the things I was talking about, but bringing another reference that these understood that the United States is a terrorist, and there's no support for Stop Arming a Terrorist Act, and why? And then they thought that was pathetic and hypocritical. The next story came in, was very interesting. Again, it's a reverse application, illogical at some level. Almost doesn't make any sense. It makes sense on the surface, but it doesn't really make sense in the application. Surprise House vote rolls back authority for the war on terror. And I'm thinking, boy, they're listening behind the woodshed. Isn't that what I've said? You've got to take away this war of terror is why I've seen it, war of terror authority. And so here it was, folks. A surprise House vote rolls back authority for war on terror. When you read the story, even just the story about it, it says what it was to interfere with the Trump's administration's ability to wage war against terrorist organizations without prior congressional approval. When you hear it like that, it's Congress giving it right to say, you're not going to mess with those terrorists, are us. President Trump. They're actually taking it back and making it more difficult to interfere with terrorists. And so this is completely in line with the definition I gave you last week. You know them by the fact that they protect the terrorists. This act, it says by the title, it rolls back the authority, was actually rolling back the president's authority to interfere with terrorists, is again a confirmation that the United States is the terrorist. It's the premier terrorist in your life, worldwide. Fascinating. Again, you look at the surface of this, you look at the news titles, and you think everything's kind of going down the road of, oh good, they rolled back the war on terror. No, they rolled back the interference with the terrorists. Like when I told you when they defined terrorism as something other than the government. I said that is just them giving them license to be a terrorist. It's you, they blame you. Remember, they blame Syria, they blame you for something that you can't be and aren't going to do. And they did it back when they defined terrorism as something other than them. If they were a terrorist back in 78 and they made a terrorism definition in 2001 or later, don't you think they knew what they were doing? You got to get your mind screwed on a little different here when we start thinking about this to find out that right in front of your face, they're lying to you. And what they do is not what they tell us that they're doing. And their intention is totally, completely outside of any rational, critical thinking mind. I don't mean the critical thinking in the alternative media. I'm talking about really critical thinking minds with a foundation and a history and in a context, understanding the limits and the extensions and all this kind of neat stuff that's out there. It really is kind of neat at some level. A lot of work at some point, but once it's in us, if it was in us, it wouldn't be such a work. We'd look at everything that was a crime against us and we'd say, stop that, or I'm arresting you. And yet, how much do you hear that? No, we hand it over to the terrorist to go do the arrest. Well, we agree that the one who says, oh, there's a terrorist out there, I'm going to go stop him. Okay, go ahead and stop him. There's no authority for any of it. So surprise House vote rolls back authority for war on terror is not a surprise vote when you understand it actually is going to protect the terrorists, the government, the Congress. And we're back to Oliver Stone's comment of the Republican-Democrat paradigm, which we sued. We sued the political parties in 2013 to enjoin their war against the laws of the United States. It's all tied, folks, tied together. I'm not going to get the coverage behind the woodshed that Oliver Stone is going to get, and he's only going to speak to a small part of what we saw, I think, a lot more comprehensively. What I'd have you to do, listen to what I'm saying, and understand what I'm saying, and then start telling other people. But with an understanding of what we're doing. And I know that's not happening because not too many people will contact me to find out. And so I continue, as Oliver Stone has, in my truth to you, and continue until, I guess, the last breath or whatever else may stop me. A technical difficulty. Again, continuing on, the government is a terrorist. And I talked to you before. Again, this week seemed to, again, another confirmation in a row of things I'll tell you really shortly here last week, the week before, and it's things I've been talking to you forever. I've told you about looking at the Libra Code, understanding you live under military occupation by the definition. And here we have a proof. And I don't know whether the chicken comes here or the egg comes first on this one, but it's a proof nonetheless that you live in an occupied territory and your police are soldiers, and they will fit right into that once they are given more costumage in order to prove it. Quantifying the additional killings committed by cops when they get military weapons. Now, this is a little, I don't even know what part to begin or what note. I wanted to point out something in here. Actually, inside the story, you need to read this stuff. Someone's quantified that you give a cop a military weapon, he'll shoot you with it. Okay, like that needed to be studied, but there's a proof now. Someone's actually did the study. Well, let me point out something I've told you before. Another thing is self-evident when you understand language. And they pointed out here, and I'll take credit for this one. I don't know, I haven't heard anybody talking about this except for me. And there's no proof they listen to me at all. But haven't you heard behind the woodshed for years, over years, not 4 years, but over years, periodically, this condition about underneath the 133 program for the United States Department's surplus military equipment to local jurisdictions and cops, that the terminology that they use, and they call you something, I told you was indicative of a military occupation. And this second paragraph points out to that, confirming what I told to you, whether or not they heard it from behind the woodshed. This is reflected in many ways, this condition, this occupying army, they say in the first paragraph. Folks, how long have I been telling you about this? This was never really spoken about until I came along, and then years has gone by and no one really adopts it. A couple of people got intrigued by it, like Clint Richardson. I pointed this out to him early on, and he picked up on this pretty clearly and quickly. In fact, we've done some interviews about the Libra Code. But remember, I told you that they've gone beyond the Libra Code. They went beyond international law. They went beyond, as they told to us, the United States government terrorists went beyond when they went extrajudicial, determining they were now permanently a terrorist at all, everywhere. This story tells you this is communities literally clad in the armor of an occupying army. Okay, great. Now someone else sees it, whether or not they got it from behind the woodshed. This is reflected in many ways. Now we get to terminology, and I told you this is self-evident. You don't live in a place you thought you lived. You live under an occupying force. When they use such a term as civilian to denote someone who isn't a police officer. Police are also civilians, which is why the police, military police, are called military police, to contrast them from civilian police. And that's not actually accurate, but the point is that they pointed out here, when you're talked about as a civilian, you live in a military consequence, and you don't even know it. If your police force considers you a civilian, then they perforce consider themselves the military occupiers. And then they add here, not community peace officers, which is incorrect. The community is that thing they've developed, that district. And so, we've got someone who doesn't quite understand, but someone that is seeing it. And maybe he listened behind the woodshed, or she listened and didn't listen too close. So, there's always a nuance that we can move on. But I was really wanting to point out here more confirmation that I've been telling you, that someone else is seeing it and sees it in the similar light, and you can know it by when you see them, folks. It's right. It's the first rule in Libra Code. You knows a military occupation when you sees them. You knows it when you hears how they respond to you, who you are. If you're a civilian in that context, you are in a military context. How often have you heard people in a free society being referred to as civilians by all kinds of government? It has been telling you you live in this occupied territory, state, whatever the thing is you want to call it. Again, give it any name. You're not living under law. And certainly anymore with the extrajudicial treatment of all you civilians, all you crickets. We were required to throw these idiots off. These psychopaths needed to be controlled and contained. Anyway, the story goes on. I just wanted to point out, someone else now sees that the term civilian absolutely requires that you are in that status underneath a military regime. And until you start getting this, you're not going to understand, like I pointed out to you before, how removing the war on terror authority from the president isn't necessarily giving up on the terrorists or diminishing their power or cause and effect anywhere in the world, including in your life. I'm talking to you in the United States of America. That's us. The United States government, this caucustocracy that has risen up inside it, is a terrorist organization. And if you didn't understand it, you can look out in the world and see what's going on. You're telling yourself stories to deny that when you find out that these cops, when given a military weapon, will take on more of a soldier attitude and will kill you. They don't even have restraint. Remember, this is the other thing. Just because you get a gun doesn't mean you use it. These people don't have that filter anymore. You can be too smart to be a cop. That's not my derogation statement. The Supreme Court said that. And 3 cases now? 4 cases? You can be too psychologically stable to be a cop. If that wasn't telling you we're in some trouble and getting your attention, folks, to get to do something, that spider's getting you. I can just tell you that spider's coming. That spider's coming in a form that's going to have 8 jack boots on its feet. It's going to be stomping on your face. That's what's here. That's what's coming. They act to kill you, and they can just write it off later. They're not even, they're immune from most all prosecutions unless something goes terribly, terribly wrong. This is all part of the Libra Code. Even though they throw that out, you can still use it as a guidance. And this is what's happened. In one case, you folks may have interested yourself or not in the Malheur murder of Finicum and those people with the Bundys and their first case acquittals. But when they did that acquittal, I told you, when it doesn't go right, someone's going to have to be thrown under the bus. It's happening. Someone's going to have to be thrown under the bus. The military went too far there. You got the natives to pay attention. They can't have that. You can't rile the natives. That's International Law 101. Don't rile the natives. They'll throw you out. Well, we got a little bit yet to go there, but don't rile the natives is the first call. Now, they did that. someone's got to go under the bus to appease the natives, like you think something's going on. The problem with this is that they're going to go through one under the bus, and there should have been maybe 1,000 of the government thrown in jail, and conspiracy charges, and as we charged the same government with treason, folks. This is all set up and planned back in partly between the occupying force and the law of the land and the Malheur thing and the minerals and the farmers and the ranchers, and all that's all tied together here. I don't know if you appreciate how all this really integrates. I would have never been, I don't think I could see back 20, 30 years ago and planned where I am today to be here, to be right at the crux of the problem. And here I be, folks. But I took a different track. And that's the only thing I can really tell to people. You gotta really be that real critical mind. Look for your foundations. It put me on a different track. Something that apparently not many people can do or see. And I'm telling you though, it's not unusual. We all needed to maintain what I understand, everyone should have never not understood. What more I can know, I don't know that yet, but we'll see. We see as we go. But here it is. When the military goes a little too far, as I told you before, it happens. It's right in the Libra Code. You can see the guidance. So this is nothing new, nothing special. But when those people got acquitted, I was wondering, I wonder who's going to get thrown under the bus. Well, apparently somebody did it for themselves. Breaking news. FBI agent indicted for lying about killing of Lavoy Finicum. So, the FBI agent that lied about firing a gun that they said that they weren't even there to do anything, someone lied and said they didn't fire a gun, and it was found out that he did. Now, there was a bunch of other FBI agents, and there was a lot of, my point on this a little bit was, there was also a lot of, laser sights on the people coming out of that truck, which proved there was a whole lot more lying going on than one FBI agent. So it appears that it's breaking down a little bit. They've got a problem. They're going to throw an FBI agent under the bus to try and justify, like the lying justifies the murder. The story you can read it. He's indicted for lying, not for murder. He was there based on a whole other conspiracy of things, based on, I told you before, when those people were acquitted, that took away all probable cause that they were going down the highway in an illegal manner to be stopped, notwithstanding that blocking the highway is a crime. You're not supposed to do it that way. It's kind of why they went to the blow your tire out, those tire strips. They're really not supposed to put a blockade across any highway. They can blow your tires out and let you roll to a stop, but they're not supposed to block you out. So that was a completely illegal blockade. People haven't even remembered that part. But now they have no reason to even have the blockade. So you can see this can be compounding backwards. But that they only got the guy for knowingly and willfully making a false or fictitious or fraudulent statement instead of the murder, and then get the rest of them, is the cover-up. And so I want you to be aware that the military can go so far, but it can go a long way, but it can only go so far. And here we see this. I think this is reflected in this point. Where this goes, I'm not saying. What I'm saying is that you're seeing a dynamic, and there's enough people that got called on, that got attention to this. The prairie dogs all looking, that they gotta at least sacrifice someone in order to try and make it look like there's some accountability when there is none. You live in a military context. You're a civilian. Now, what's interesting, those of you that read the words, read for terms, you'll find out that the word civilian actually means attorney in another context. Now, mine can go kind of neat on there. There's a whole other subjugation based in that as well, no matter how they treat the word civilian. But why would they just call you civilians in that context as well, is probably why you also have no excuse, and you're all subject, no matter where you are, to all authority that tends to have the power to hurt you. Just another thought for you, those that are thinking and breaking down these words and thinking you know the context. There's all kinds of different jurisdictional authorities that you can think in history that could or could not be. And it's up to you to start exercising your mind on that. Why? Because when I think you do that, you'll start realizing your place and where it is and how these people really are and aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing. It makes it a lot easier to get quickly to what has to be called out in order to essentially call it out. You don't get into these nonsense things where you have a FBI agent going down for lying and not murder. It was reference to another case, and this is again, our court case referenced this as well in a different way, but again, I got a link. Someone's talking about it. He's talking about this case fairly clearly, so I wanted you to see what the information is, because the subject matter is a little bit obscure. Okay, this is about jurisdiction and territorial jurisdiction and lawful establishment of the courts, when they have power, when they don't. Power is has the force and effect on their judgment. Authority and jurisdiction is the right to hear and determine to a determination, and then the power to enforce it. These terms are these power, authority, jurisdiction are very important to understand, and they're constrained. There's limitation. I think Gary L. actually, just now occurred, that sent me this link to someone who's now found this case called the Lufkin case. I mentioned it before, but it's an interesting read that you can go through for yourself to start get oriented on these things that I talk about. A federal tax case shows evidence the U.S. legal system is a fraud. Well, okay, we all know that. Well, you got to understand how this affects itself, and then you start to understand it's not just a bunch about opinion or drivel, what I talk about or what other people might talk about, but there's something more important here. There is direct proofs that can be made beyond opinion as well. U.S. legal system is a fraud. That's a statement on a title. It's worse than this, folks. I get that through our court case. But what this is, the Lufkin case, and it talked about going in, these people addressed very similar problems that we did in 2013, where the court was assigning judges that didn't have jurisdiction and courts that didn't have jurisdiction. And so there's a little bit more here that I can send you to look at than I can do for our case, because ours is still, it's still not put it out on Pacer. You can't read our case. And the district assembly has decided it doesn't go out until we're working on enforcement with somebody, of the default judgment. But what they talk about here is the limitation of this so-called government, the limitation of legal, the limitation of territorial, and they did it outwardly in the case filings. What I read this case as maybe being evidence, even though they got it out in the case filings, they didn't quite understand what they were dealing with, even though what we dealt with in 2013 was very, very similar. We dealt with it differently. We were using remedies against the silence instead of using motions to try and get them to do something, which they had no authority to do anyway. Lufkin case is a tax case, but we're talking about a jurisdiction of courts and this case challenged this jurisdictions that I keep telling you about, the judges, and whether or not they could have it, and there was never a response. This was done in 2015. Our case was 2013. And our case is resolved by quo warranto demands for the proof on the record, from the record, of the authority of the judge or the clerk to transfer the case, if they didn't do in this case, or the court itself, an Article 1 to 4 court, opposed to an Article 3 court that we filed into, which is defaulted, which means it exists and is defaulted. They couldn't force it into an Article 1 territorial court. Anyway, this is another case that came out 2 years after ours that does for them what we did for us on these courts that are not legitimate. And again, exposing you live in a society that's been made up around you that you never knew was improper. And it's not important that you say, oh, it's improper. You have to identify how, because in the identification of how also starts to let you know where you are relative to this thing and who these criminals are, how to out them, how to point it out. So it's not opinion. Most people think this is opinion or not functioning or what are you going to do about it? They put everything in all excuses. Nothing like that. It's tangible, provable, factual definitions. The United government right now is a terrorist. why people go off and try to invent another utopia when the government is a terrorist is a real fascination to me. It's another style of agreement with the terrorists because you think you're big and bad and intelligent enough to create another utopia that won't work because you don't have any context or foundation. But it's an evasion of your duty to stop the crime against you now, is my problem with a lot of this. But this is a little statement here. Federal tax case shows evidence of U.S. legal system is a fraud. Forget the tax case part. It shows the legal system in a context that doesn't fulfill Article 3. And I told you before, I've done it on my broadcast, it's not just about the judge's oath, and it's just not about the judge. These judges don't even have a status that's worthy of Article 3. If they are commissioned, then there may not be a court that was established in Article 3 for them to sit in. It may not be in a place that's an Article 3 court, even though they could be established. They haven't convened in Article 3 jurisdiction. They may not be sitting on ceded land. I mean, it's on and on, all this stuff that's a failure that everybody seems to look past, and everyone says, oh, that's too complicated. No, the reason why it's too complicated, they got you not thinking their way. You don't need to think about it, because that was the very first challenge you were supposed to make, to put them in their place so they can't hurt you. And when they do, they are obviously criminals, and that was to be arrested immediately. Everything I see now really has a more immediate response. That every excuse around this, even to come up with, oh, this is so wrong, and we're going to, statist that, or free or voluntary, it's all evasions of what you're supposed to be doing, because what you're experiencing is a crime against you. That just by definition means there was a society that didn't tolerate it, that's just not being enforced. And you divorce all that from your thoughts, too. And, I mean, my mind, again, I start thinking about this, and my mind wanders, how absent are we as a people? And I think about that big spider eating that cricket. That's gonna be us, and it's gonna be you, pretty soon. Really soon. So, another sort of fraud upon the situation, and interesting excuses, and the dynamic, the political dynamic of these political parties, which are really like, I liken them as the flame on the end of each end of a candle being burned. These political parties is the flame on the end of a single candle, and the candle is the lawful society that you all were promised to. You must have kept, that you failed. They don't care which political direction they burn you. They're gonna burn you. You're gonna be burned. And so there's a faux dynamic going on. And we tend to buy into that instead of calling it out. Again, this thing comes on, it goes on to these, just usurpers of nonsense and nonsense makers. It makes it sound like there's something going on. And there's a whole other thing you're missing if you don't understand a more foundational context within which this system sits. Again, given that it's a corporate structure, it has to make records and keep books underneath the tax. You want to go back to the tax code. Even the states, being administrative divisions of the federal government, they have to make records and keep books. That's what the 1939 change to the 1954 tax laws was. And I told you in 1953, most all the states that I can find change their structure to make records and keep books. By definition, they're corporations. And so you make records and keep books for an activity that's taxable. Now we get to the CIA World Fact Book saying that all you live in, and you tell you these states are really not states. They're not, and the subdivisions of these states are not political subdivisions. They're just corporate divisions of the corporation. And they have to make records and keep books of their activity. And even the federal government does the same thing. Makes records and keeps books, and they keep all these books to the GDP of the government. Even the stuff that everything it costs now becomes a gross national product, if you haven't figured that little clue out. But Christie announces New Jersey government shutdown, orders state of emergency. I want to call your attention to the fact that they're not the first now, and we're going to get this rollout. Illinois, Maine and Connecticut are all having problems with the budgets. Okay, budgets. That should call your mind up to Clint Richardson's work on the CAFR, actually explaining the CAFR from Walter Burien, whom I tried to do some videos with early on to try and explain it. But Clint Richardson explains it much better than Walter could have done to get you to understand it. The CAFR is the report which it admits inside it hides every year beyond the year that you're reading, hides all the funding, what I call black hole funding for this functioning, that the budget is just this little line item in this CAFR report that tells you that there's all kinds of, fiscal management going on, stock management going on behind the scenes to keep these things floating. The derivative market kind of blew that up, so there's really no way that you can really lose. But you're going to hear the budget can't be met here. Why? Well, because there's infighting between the two terrorist organizations running the caucusocracy. And so Christie gets to call out the Democrats. Remember, this guy was running for president as well. If you don't think the fruit rots close to the tree. That they have this infighting going on, when in fact the whole point isn't even about the budget. It's just the reason is that they can't agree on how they're going to spend what they get. Not that there's not enough to do what they need to do. What I found fascinating about this real report is it explains what won't be shut down. And what won't be shut down in this budget fight. And then you got to look at this from the standpoint of the occupying force and what it needs to make controls, and what it does to pay for itself is written in the Libre Code. Not all things will be affected. Remaining open under the shutdown, that's not quite a shutdown then is, will be New Jersey Transit, state prisons, the state police, state hospitals and treatment centers, as well as casinos, racetracks, and the lottery. That sounded just like military support here to me. And so you see this whole thing has got different styles, different types of budgeting. But what are they talking about if they aren't going to have a budget and the rest of the government functions? What is the shutdown? To what extent? Why only that much? Nobody seems to ask any of this stuff. And when we don't get involved, we don't get an awareness of what these people are really talking about, and we allow it to continue. We allow the nonsense to continue, and they make it worse, and we think we need something from them anyway, and it's just them having an infight to make themselves relevant. You'll never see the government shut down. I should tell you something. So they'll shut down and they'll keep what benefits that they would say that they're giving you from you, but they're going to keep what they need to running, the state prisons and the police and the money from the casinos rolling. Yeah, they're not going to shut all that down. Maybe you should look and see the authorities for all that. Maybe they're not subject to the local rule either. So relative to the budget, is Illinois going down? No, they have plenty of investment in the system, the stock market Ponzi scheme. And we don't look into that either. And so they have their day, they have their way, they have the way they pay the military to be on you. They said the state police ain't going down. You think that the military goes away then? No, they got the military soldiers out there on you. And they have a place to put you when they don't like it, and they make it look like they're doing some service to keep protecting you. And maybe they are, because you forgot how to protect yourself. And you let the nonsense go on. You let the people around you get a little bit wild and maybe a little less principled, so that eventually it ripples out into all of a sudden you got no principle at all. I don't know what the dynamic is. It's certainly not one that we need. We certainly need to control that, so they have no excuse to service us. Because you give them that right, then they start making decisions. Remember that talking about the community, the word community, peace officer. Community is not a good deal. You have community care from the peace officer. Is not a peace officer caring for anything but the system. And this is a failed insight in lots of people I see writing stuff that is not going to advance what we need to know. And I sound a little bit on the edge. when I tell people that, I don't agree with you. Well, go read some more, maybe. That's what I would tell you. I'm not talking anything that I haven't found to be action truth. Experience with these things being exactly the way I say. Absent any misspeak that I do periodically, not so much, but sometimes, like my August and October for the earthquakes. So you give them over community care, and the community will care for you. And this is how this is going to work. Here's your human rights court, folks. You don't think this is a terror on the world, and you hand over your abilities when you go ask for something from these jerks that are International Bar Association? Go look it up, folks. Human rights is not anything you thought it was. It's only to the extent, and you'll see this 3/4 of the way through the Human Rights Declaration, it's to the extent that it affects the state. That's your human rights. Here's a proof of that. Human Rights Court rules life support cut for infant needlessly signing his death warrant. In the UK, I think it was, 2 parents will lose their beloved 10-month-old son who what could arguably be deemed a state execution, so avoidably vile the imminent killing of Charles Dickens undoubtedly rolls in his grave. That's a little story of a problem with someone took their little one into the hospital, and then apparently the UK, once you do that, you hand the determination of that life, that life to the administration of the hospital. You lose all rights. We're talking parental rights here is another problem with this story. Well, the Human Rights Court said that the baby doesn't have to be given the treatment because it doesn't appear that the treatment would come to any good, even though money over £1 million £1.4 million has been raised to take the baby from the hospital to the United States, where this so-called questionable therapy or questionable therapy is available. It's all paid for. The flight's all paid for. The Human Rights Court said that the determination will be made by the hospital, not the mother and the father. Or they said parents, either not. The status is all wrong. But this is your Human Rights Court. These are the people that you're putting your life and your little one's future into. Your life is not precious. Your rights don't extend to making your own determination. You have no property in you, your offspring, yourself, your things around you. The government does. The internationalist does. The globalist does. The technocrat does. You don't. And you don't because you didn't understand property. So you are property. So here's what the global terrorists are controlling. Your very life. The lives of your little ones. Even when you have an answer. Even when you'll pay for it. They're not going to let go. So how dumb does this start to sound? They will not let you who've got money to take your little one, your little boy, to another country to get care that he needs, however questionable it is to the government on the other across the pond, that they will allow that not to happen. And yet in the United States, the Democrats will go after Dick Cheney and complain that he killed 70,000 salmon. It is the definition of this new psychopathic environmental terrorism that goes on under the technocrats and the UN agenda of human rights. And it's not all your rights. It's not rights at all. Only subject to the state's needs. Isn't that shared prosperity, folks? Isn't that all what we've been told? What the globalist ideology wants? I'll move on now. So the 70,000 fish have more of an outcry than the little baby. And this interesting about the 70,000 salmon. I don't want to kill 70,000 salmon. But it happens to be in an interesting problem, relative to an interesting problem, which is something I am interested in, and that needs to be answered, but not in the way it's being advanced by the political candle-burning methodology. The Congressional Committee is preparing to investigate Vice President Dick Cheney's role in water management decisions that killed more than 70,000 salmon in Oregon. Now, this committee's not not interested to go check if whether or not the UK and the Human Rights Court has violated rights, protecting people globally with the United States of America standards, which you also know is only civil rights in the corporate standing, right? It's the extortions of every kind. That's why they're not arguing it. No, they'd rather just go after with the other side's political party action of someone out of office about killing some fish. 70,000, more important. And you see the problem within the insanity. But this is an important issue for local people to where these fish are because of the reason. Whether or not I'm not talking about whether or not the 70,000 fish were killed by Cheney or his decision or not. It has to do with the use of water and the control. The Democrats are saying they want Cheney to go down for killing salmon. 36 West Coast Democrats requested the Resources Committee investigation after the Washington Post reported of Cheney's involvement in the managing flows from the Klamath River in 2002. Let me call your attention to something, folks. These same Democrats are the ones that are stealing the water. They want to tear down the dams completely to get rid of all the water in that Klamath Falls drainage, because there is no water in the summer without the dams. These Democrats want to destroy the dams, take out all the fish, and move that water into Southern California. Did the report say that? Absolutely not. No, that's what I deal with. They use the Endangered Species Act. It's irrelevant to why the dams were made in Klamath, and the byproduct benefit was that it was a waterway that could be sustained all year, not only in the winter. And when you take the dams out of that system, it's an inverted system as well. Hot water comes out. You raise the temperatures if any fish could be there, and you kill them by the heat. In the summer, you don't have any water flow because there's no water reserve. The dams make the reserve that allow the salmon to be there. Whether or not 70,000 fish died to the use of water for farming, the very reason the dams were put in there, the byproduct of which is power, not as a first and primary need, but for put into to bring into use the desert of the eastern Oregon. Another problem, these Democrats in the West Coast are trying to desertify the eastern Oregon as well, which is contrary to the desertification treaties I talked to you, and is a war crime. And I think all these things are bigger stories than whether or not 70,000 salmon were dead. Where was the government if they wanted to make those salmon alive to catch them because they were going to die anyway? And use them for food. Who is the real culprit here? And then as against production rights, water rights, farming rights, rights and things that didn't happen unless man built the dams to let the fish be there. Because there was no fisheries there before those dams. The water doesn't exist in the summer. And this is the terrorism that these people put. They fight amongst themselves to destroy your rights. You get to start thinking that these fish, and I want the fish, there's no doubt about it, I'd rather see the fish live. But in these decisions, and they're pasted on these websites, gives you the wrong idea of what was really supposed to happen. When in fact the actual terrorist here is not that Cheney killed 70,000. If they get their way, they're going to kill the entire fishery, and it's a war crime. And I don't see anybody talking about that in this article, and I don't see about anybody speaking up against these lunatics, like Nick Rahal out of Virginia, if you don't think he's an eco-terrorist. What's he talking about stuff in Klamath from Virginia? If you don't understand that this eco-terrorism and this agenda terrorism, this blood clot on mankind is your government right now. Remember, just get it right back to the fact, without those dams there are no fish, okay? Period. That there had to be some use of the water in order at the time to keep other production going was the only reason for those dams to be there in the first place. Let me offer at the very end here, it says, Democrats say the salmon kill devastated the commercial fishing industries in Oregon, California, with fishermen still feeling the economic effects today. Those dams were not made for commerce. They were made for production. Without the dams, there is no fishery. You can't kill something. This is like did you stop beating your wife? There's no salmon in commercial fisheries industry coming out of the Klamath drainage without the dams. The same thing these Democrats want to destroy. And the plans for the water theft are already in place. And I'm going to tell you, it wasn't for what we've done, Jefferson Mining District comments and being the witness and getting other people to be the witness and getting counties to step up to be what the witnesses that they're supposed to be. Those dams would have probably been out by now. I'm not saying that we've been the only cause. We've been a witness. We aided others to be a proper witness that what they're doing is completely a crime. Then we've advanced. It's a war crime. It violates the desertification treaty. It's irrelevant to the fish. The fish are a benefit byproduct. And so we hear these stories and we don't think they're important. We don't think right about them. In fact, this is an attack on your lifestyle by the terrorists, the Republican or Democrat Party, using the fighting amongst themselves to destroy your life. How many times am I going to repeat that? Over and over, the same method they use. And if you're not engaged with this, you won't ever see it. You may not even be interested. And yet, this affects your life. And the ripple effect from this is monstrous. How far this really goes on. And so I made a tweet on this. I said that exactly that. This Democrat attack against Cheney, and I could care less about any of them. What they're trying to divorce us from is the fact that the water was used for productive uses. It wasn't wasted. That water wasn't there at the time in the summer, unless it was by the dams, and those fish were there because of that man's development. I'm given that they were killed. So what was the 70,000 were killed? Were they killed because of the spawning that they would have died anyway, actually, or was the government not to collect them up when they did that? Produce some more. Make some more commercial fishery. So I said, relative to the Democrat attack against the Republicans, it's a faux attack. It's all going to focus you on the commercial aspects of fishing instead of the reason why those dams are there, the power is there for the productive use of the land, which is quite valuable and quite useful over there on the eastern of Oregon, southeast of Oregon. And I said this is well from a bunch of eco-terrorists wanting to destroy the dams, eliminate all fish, and send the water to California contrary to law. Did they say anything like that in the story? No. You'll see it yourself. But this is what these psychopaths in government are doing now. They're destroying your productive capacity. And Trump can't make America great, as we has been notified, until you get productive use back on track. It is what starts the original wealth, which allows the derivative commercial economies and jobs. Everybody in production are making livelihoods. I've gone through this over and over again. So you don't see anybody talking in this attack about that. Nope, you're talking about the fact that they're complaining that the water was used for that, and the fish died. So these people focus you on things with their opinions and their agendas. Nobody reflects the law that was keeping the peace. Nobody, see, the way this thing works, the Endangered Species Act, the violation was not the killing of the fish. The violation was not understanding that, or not preparing and timely to protect the fish or take them when they would die. So the government itself is at fault for not having a plan to either provide for a place that the fish weren't there or take them. The Endangered Species Act does not say protect the endangered species at all costs. And when people start figuring that out, we're going to have a lot more peaceful lifestyle. We won't be sitting subject to this consensus nonsense. I find consensus psychosis. As we see climate models overestimated warming again and again and again. Climate models are wrong and being updated to better reflect the results of satellite temperature measurements that confirmed a slowdown in the temperature rise over past decades. A group of leading climate scientists have said, okay, so their models were no good. No different than Syria not doing something it couldn't do. You can't have a model that doesn't model anything. So you can't even get in on this issue talking about the fact that they're admitting their models are no good because it says they could have a model. And I retweeted that out as well. This is Michael Man-made global warming. But the article you'll get is in the minimum continues the myth and excuses felonious, even treasonous consensus. It's the method process of your destruction. It's used by these Democrats. It's used by the Republicans. Where do I know that? They agreed in default in our lawsuit 2013, where we interfered with the corrupt court's interference with our case, just like your Lufkin case talked about. We did it 2 years earlier. Again, it's in the books to see. The prison they build up around you, the fraud, the felony, the treason built up around you that functions normally, that you resist, and you make up more servitude in your utopic ideas instead of saying, wait a minute, let's just stop these people making crime against us at every turn. It's they're consensus psychosis. I think I just made that up, but it's something, folks. It's something. These people use this consensus against us. These models that can't be, and everyone agrees with them because they call themselves a scientist, and you find out, well, that's not science. It's adjective science, if I call it science. It's a political lobbying under the color of a science, a felony. Acting actively against the laws of the United States, a treaty no less in this dam and this attacking. It's irrelevant they're attacking Cheney. It's the fact that what it was being used for, that supposedly 70,000 fish die when they were supposed to make a resolution for the taking of those fish anyway. That's government waste, again. And they did it all by consensus. It's a psychosis. All right? So we can buy into all this stuff, or we can start calling out for the insanity that it is. And we live in an insane asylum, and the inmates are running it, and they're psychopaths, and they've risen to the top. That defines a caucustocracy. I guess I'll repeat myself until someone finally figures this out and starts to promote it more than I am. Or better, because I guess I'm not the Tony Robbins of truth. I'm not the Tony Robbins of proper action, of empowered action, of powerful resistance. I guess I'm not any of that. And yet today, last week, I find lots of people now speaking to things I think only I have spoken of for years. I mean, I don't, part of me wants to take a little bit of credit for that, but part of me says, listen, just pick up the idea and run with it. Start doing something with it. I'm tired, folks. I've been doing this for quite a long time. And yet I will persist, apparently, and I'm encouraged by Oliver Stone. He said his experience is pretty much what I've found as well. You're in a war, and you're going to get your tail kicked. And I said, well, I'm going to get my tail kicked. I'm going to start whipping some ass. Whoop ass, folks. Have to get in the fight. Only we do it a little different. We got to be educated. We got to teach ourselves better, and then we got to teach those that are unprincipled. And if we don't teach the unprincipled, that becomes the future. It's an unprincipled future. It's worse. It becomes this insanity you now exist and live in. People that would blame other people for something that they couldn't do, haven't done, and then they somehow have imputed with the idea that, oh, because I called out something you can't do and haven't done it, you're going to stop doing it. Nonsense. Along with this water thing, which is kind of interesting to me, currently with this attack, with the Democrats going after Cheney, and again, forget the politics. Look at the condition. There's laws regarding water. There's laws regarding why the dams are there. There's laws regarding what they did, what their purpose was for. There's laws of why. That's completely divorced and not spoken to in any of this. Absent in all the text you read that you talk about articles. Here's another one that comes up. Again, it's all this propaganda noise. And we got to settle this down for ourselves and tell people. And I finally got a little fed up. I don't usually do this, but I finally got fed up in a couple more tabs I'll explain. At the same time, we get the word that Trump and EPA to dump the waters of the United States, the WOTUS rule definition. And the article here says it frees 247 million acres of farmland. So here we are attacking the administration, the agency prior, was attacking production. I've told you that we weren't talking fisheries and commerce. We're talking about water used for production. If you don't use that water for production, you're all going to die. That's where your food comes from. It's where your support industries for things that you're doing comes from. It's where your way of life comes from. A way of life different than most urbanites anyway, but nonetheless required to be separate. That this water of the United States rule definition, the Trump administration is going to revoke it. And so then the eco-terrorists came out and said, oh, our water's going to go to heck. Well, it's the quality. Well, I've told you the rule was the limitation. And this is where people start to miss it. No wonder do they talk about the law too much. And this article starts to point out the limitations. I told you, remember, we made, the Jefferson Mining District, we made a comment to this. Before the first court case, and I think the current Attorney General was involved in Oklahoma and sued the EPA over that rule. Our comment was not exactly the same words, but very similar to what the Supreme Court ended up finding about the limitation. That the Clean Water Act pertains to what's called navigable rivers. They pertain to the commerce stretches of declared rivers that are navigable. That's it. What's been going on is the agency tried to extend itself beyond the commercial. Remember, the Constitution gives Congress the power over commerce amongst the states. That's the navigable river. That's the portion of a river that's navigable. That's all. That's all this is all over about. It has nothing to do with the quality of water. It only has to do with whether or not you're going to report pollution in a navigable portion to the federal government. The federal government attempted to take out the entirety. What was interesting to me, and what I've always laughed at, and this article points out that the control is in the states. Well, guess what? The control in the states was tailored, because essentially they're federal districts, it was tailored to enforce the Clean Water Act in the states on waters of the state. All improper, but the limitation was the federal definition. And so what this does also, by removing that rule and limiting it to the prior navigable portion, is really just bring the law back into bearing over what it's supposed to be doing. It never had anything to do with the anti-pollution, had nothing about cleaning the water. I told you it was the ability to pollute water a little bit. That's what these licenses, these called laws are. These environmental constraints are the constraint for pollution of some sort, somehow. And then they also give the agency an upper hand regulation authority to control whatever industry and monopolize against any industry it wants to, in favor, in this case, of an environmental non-use, conservative non-use issue, which is another war crime. So restoring this rule to the limited actual navigable river was the law, and that's all that's going on here. It's not what the environmentalists say. I wanted to point out again that we made a comment in this. We put a secondary comment on the review of this, and I'm glad to be a part of that comment that brings up the fact of that removal, that revocation, although in this article they show, they talk to this in the context of the Farmers Association. And that's fine. What they bring up is everything I've talked to you about. The Commerce Clause, the application of the Rivers and Harbors Act, why miners don't dredge, why they use that word wrongly and indiscriminately to hurt themaselves. The Clean Water Act of 72. All this is, I've talked to you about all of this and how it wasn't supposed to be interfering. It was an massive, unlawful, unconstitutional overreach by the federal agencies to do this. But to understand it by the media, you won't understand the core of your existence, the core of why we have certain things to actually hold on to in this country called the United States of America. There was things that did limit government. What we're seeing and living under is the extenuation beyond the lawful authority, and up until now, no way to remedy that. So you get the link, you get a lot of links in this article about this point, why this rule was no good, and what do you see the agencies doing to extend beyond their lawful authority? When you see the limitation, that should give you some encouragement. There are limitations. I've been talking about this for a long time. It is another indication of what it is. The battle is forever, it seems, ongoing, but it's one that we can assert, and correctly so. It's not understandable. It doesn't take special knowledge. It just takes a focused knowledge on a particular subject matter. And this is what irritates me about the so-called alternative media, or whoever thinks they got the next best news or whatever. You got a bunch of writers that have a bunch of content providers have absolutely zero clue on the subject matter that they were talking about. It was epitomized right after this Trump thing comes out, this report, where they remove the rule. This next report says, waters at risk? EPA will revoke the Clean Waters Act of 1972. This is actually printed. I couldn't believe this. It's called, I call them out because I don't like this kind of misreporting. The fringe news. Waters at risk is a question, and then it makes the statement, EPA will revoke the Clean Waters Act of 1972. This is going after the action to really reconstrain the rule back to where it's supposed to. Now, when I read that title, all I could think of is the wrong information that's being put out. Alt media fails, if we can call this alt media. If it's media at all, it's if it intended to be media, it's ignorant of a foundation in law, ignorant of the law of the land, and purports to be able to say anything. Really kind of got to me a bit. This came also through before it's news. You know, it's a story aggregator. Maybe I shouldn't feel so critical about that place because it just aggregates a bunch of stories. But I really, at this point, because I guess it's something I have to work on, I have to work through. The noise on this is terrible. It's killing us, these types of misunderstandings. That title alone, Waters at Risk, the EPA will revoke the Clean Waters Act of 1972, folks. Did you catch the problem right off the bat? Will the EPA revoke the Clean Water Act? Well, the story says that they're revoking a rule definition. How did it jump to revoking the entire act? And so I had to respond to them. I said, you folks really need to get your head out. And I don't normally do this, but maybe I'm getting crusty in my older age. You folks really need to get your head out. These people who wrote this article and the people that promoted it. And anybody who re-mirrored it or whatever, you re-linked it. I had to ask two questions. It says the EPA was about to revoke, on that story, the EPA was about to revoke the CWA, the Clean Water Act of 72? I had to ask. It's so clear to me how far the head is being hidden here and how far it really does have to be pulled out. Can an agency revoke an act of Congress? Was my first question, folks. When I read that title, did you understand, did it even occur to you, well, the agency can't revoke a congressional act, regardless of how it's going to implement it. So my first question to these people, before you start writing a story, why don't you check on what's going on? Can an agency revoke an act of Congress? My second question was, these are rhetorical questions, folks. I don't need the answer. If you don't get this, I guess, sarcasm here, but it's really impinges on our inability to properly act, and also why we go and start making up stuff that's just not relevant, not going to work, not going to help us at any time that we need now. Isn't a federal regulation beyond navigable rivers unlawful, was my next question. Isn't federal regulation beyond navigable rivers unlawful? It's actually unconstitutional, folks. Of course it's unlawful. Why didn't that prior discussion, and everyone who retweeted, remirrored, whatever that story, why didn't anybody that I can see ask that question, that story even got out that way? What is it in us that won't analyze the stories, these reports of these very important things, touching the very foundation of the law of the land, and a bunch of people that claim to be constitutional readers, understanding the law, know what's right, know what liberty is, know what freedom is, and then they can't get that correct. And a lot of other things also, but this one seemed to be just a kind of stick me this week. Given the Constitution says the Congress was given by the states over to Congress to regulate the commerce amongst the states, and a navigable river is a navigable highway in commerce. Isn't that really the limit? And so any rule that would expand that jurisdiction, that authority, that power, would be unlawful in my mind very clearly. But that's all that rule did, that everyone that I've been reading about and would promote that story argues with. Is this consensus psychosis that's a treason, it's unlawful, you're all felons that you do this. Literally, folks. You take an authority you don't even understand and then make that an authority in fact, de facto. And then if not, we don't argue at all and we just make up stuff like, oh, the government isn't working for us, or this guy's no good, or this or that. You know, and the whole problem was you never took enough interest in it in the beginning that it got here. So we have all this nonsense going on, no real resort to the reality. What this basic law that kept the peace and kept the constraints down so that we didn't have all this trouble. As I've told you, all this trouble comes when you have this warring against each other, whether it's be by the faux war of the political parties or amongst ourselves, or the disagreements in opinion and all this, are coming because of our mass ignorance, or those that know it's a wrong and they're pushing it to see whether or not you are massively ignorant. And then we focus on the fight instead of the fact of the fraud, or that it's not actually a fight, is our problem. And everybody then runs from the obligation to stop that. And we allow these consensus psychopaths to get the day when there's a reality. The same people that would jump on Cheney from 2002, who actually want to destroy your way of life, are the ones that say, hey, we don't want you to mine in those rivers either. We don't want you to extract the minerals that you provide that we need in all of our electronic devices. Is the insanity type of level we're dealing with. That it was interesting in the same week, warning of shortage of essential minerals for laptops, cell phones, and wiring, is an international team of researchers led by the University of Delaware's Salim Ali. Now, why all these Muslim names pop up, I don't know, or Muslim-sounding names always seem to pop up anymore in the last 5 years, I don't know. But here we are again in an international team, says global resource governance and sharing of geoscience data is needed to address challenges facing future mineral supply. Is a double-edged sword story for us. First of all, it acknowledges that you need mining. You need minerals. It doesn't, if it's not mined or grown, it ain't happening in your life. And these are the same people that will attack the need for the people to go out, the miners to go out, and the farmers to go out and get and use the water for these productive purposes, to give them the things that they would use, even the computers that they would use this geospatial data to do this study for. When they're talking global resource governance, there is no such thing, folks. They're inventing something. The shared data is this big data problem, and global governance technocrats attempting to get control over your minerals. I say because in the United States it is yours. In a valuable mineral deposit, you own the mineral, and you had to work to get it. You had to get a livelihood. You expended your life to do that. No one else does this. And in the United States, they've said people will own property, not the government, except for very small places, like those ceded spaces for federal in-estate or those state properties, as was ceded in their enabling acts, those sections that were in the metes and bounds of your different sections of land as granted to state and agreed to by the state's people. But an international team is looking and saying, you need minerals. This is the same people that will attack the people for getting the minerals out. It's the same people that will attack someone for killing 70,000 fish that the government itself was supposed to protect anyway under the Endangered Species Act, but will destroy the dams, which kills all the fish. Is this interesting dichotomy I see in this little study. You can get it. Warning of shortage of essential minerals. Well, folks, get the psychopaths off the back of the producer, and you'll start to get minerals again. I think this came out of Gerald Celente. He said looming shortages. He's talking about the shortages. I'm looking at the fact that these terrorists are attacking us, so we can't produce it. And I know of many mining claims in a couple of states that have gobs and trillions of dollars in minerals ready to come out if they would just get off our back. And my comment to Gerald Celente on that story was, low-carbon society requires vast amounts of minerals and metals. AWG fraud demands minerals and production is forbidden by Enviro agenda. Neat trick. So these same people that are warning of a shortage are imposing, it's a self-inflicted wound of scarcity, if I can say it that way. And it's based in lawlessness in the imposition. And if we don't get a handle on what I've been saying about this, to orient yourself, if nothing else, not even knowing fully the subject matter, you're not understanding how that method works in lots of other facets of your life. And this low-carbon society nonsense is, again, based on this fraud. It's consensus psychosis. We got to start putting these people in their place. They call you a heretic. They're a lunatic. They have no reality-based observations at all. They work on models that I can't even call models. They aren't modeling anything but a fraud. What's that but another fraud? Why do you call it a model? It's a model fraud. And nobody seems to step up and routinely and effectively and comprehensively speak to these things. I do what I can. I would come here every couple hours on a weekend and try and do what I can. Podcast, pastcast, readcast, whatever cast. Oh, wait a minute. Maybe casting, I might need a fishing license, don't I? Yeah. Okay. Keep it up. Keep it up. But listen, and then pass out the file. I mean, we got it in plenty of places, whether or not I promote it so well. So we are requiring minerals, we require elements, and these psychopaths will keep you from all that. Why? Because their whole life is to diminish your life, diminish your way, diminish your future, diminish the future of your offspring, to the point that they control the human rights you don't even have to exist to determine where you're going to get your care. Should be causing a little bit of an alarm. And as the technocrats get control and they get more and more, we hear about all these things and these problems with all these computers that we need and all these minerals we need to do the computers and all the control infrastructure they need. We are still looking for ways to keep them out of our lives a little bit, and I wanted to pass this on. We go from elements and atoms and protons, requiring those in our life and the energy and the material, and we get into something called Proton VPN that helps keep your digital life private for free. Now, this is a diminished service, but for those of you looking for a Proton VPN or a VPN generally, apparently they offer a free service. I haven't looked at it more. I just wanted to offer it. They want to destroy us, utilizing the very things they want to keep from us, and then they complain about it. It's fascinating. We need things for ourselves. Here's get the positive action on the Proton here. You might be able to get yourself at least familiar with the VPN as much as you can trust all that as we start to get into more and more attacks on our ability to communicate, our systems, our ability to do research, and all this kind of things. And it leads us over to those of you that may have Linux and don't. The technocrats are after what you have, and you can't get at what they have, but. And the NSA did all that disclosure. I told you that all disclosure was to hide them from doing this kind of stuff everywhere. It now comes up for those of you that are in Linux distributions. CIA targets Linux operating systems with outlaw country malware, and so you got to know a little bit about that. You're vulnerable. And if you don't know, you may be vulnerable if you do know, but at least if you know that you can do some protections. Moving on, there's a new thing coming around. Super serious. A Petya ransomware affecting critical systems globally. Here's what to do was an important link that I followed on here a couple days ago, quite a few days ago. Wanted you to have this in the links on how to work this. This is a pretty serious one. What we're finding out is another story here. This Petya is not actually, and I found it's Petya, really an interesting name here with all this other nonsense going on. Any rate, I'll just leave that for your mind. That it turns out that it's been described as a ransomware. There's things you can do. It has to do with an SMB1. I'm not up on it yet. I haven't had actually time to really look at this. I want to take out the Microsoft SMB1, but I'm afraid to do it because it may kill some processes. I don't know with the Windows operating system I use. But this is a weak link in the Windows system. Again, Windows is malware. People exploit the malware to put their malware. They're calling it ransomware, but it turns out that Petya is not actually a ransomware more than a destructive wiper malware, and it's insidious. So you really pay attention. Don't try not. Most of it's on networks, so it seems. So you may be. Well, the internet's a big network though, so it's a big public network, but. You may have a little bit of isolation on your own, but start paying attention to the attacks. Start looking for ways to remedy particular problems so that you can have one less headache in your life, one less amount of time you have to do. You can focus on the things that you want to do, even if it is to go celebrate your Independence Day and not non-dependence. And think about that, folks. So go ahead and have your excitement coming, I suppose. Go ahead and have those rockets red glare and then forget what the purpose was and what happened and the people that sacrificed to get us to here and how we let it all go and on all the things I talk about every week and more, way more. So as they put malware in us and they give us stuff to take that's malware, we'll move quickly on over as I have just a few seconds here. Acetaminophen during pregnancy can inhibit masculinity. These consensus psychopaths, the environmental terrorists, the global agenda, they now figured out that they're now testing on it. Acetaminophen during pregnancy will inhibit masculinity, and we wonder why we have a problem with gender identity. It not only affects males, masculinity and the totality that they might feel masculine and interferes with that, the female masculine component is also affected and also affects your behavior. And it just rung really true about why we have gender identity as even a thing. It can be actually this testosterone interference when you're in the womb. So pregnancy, women who are pregnant, please look into this. Stop taking acetaminophen. Understand the potential risks. And I think I'll have to forego the brain-eating amoeba this week. It's in Louisiana, and have to talk to you next week. And thank you for tuning in. Hopefully something I said oriented you, give you a little more power, give you something to do more than just taking care of yourself, because that's not what we're here for yet. We have to throw off what's occupying us. I think the evidence is clear that we are being occupied by psychopaths, caucustocracy, government, terrorists. A blood clot on humanity. Thank you for tuning in today. Hope everything will be okay for you, Jules. Keep a positive attitude. I know my prayers and thoughts are with you, as well as a lot of other people. And Grimner, thank you for what you do at reallibertymedia.com and Archive and the Blogcaster. Freedomsnetwork.com, a social network, folks. So join up and see if you can use that as a tool for better. And Jules, again, best wishes to your health and hope you get back soon, strong, and keep plugging away. I want you to maybe look into that Serrapeptase, maybe a help. Thank you. I'll be here next week. Tech diffs and nature willing. Well, that's another lesson. I hope with today's information you can take it to those that misbehave. From behind the woodshed, leaving his mark on the beast, this is Hal Anthony. Till next time, journey with purpose.
Well, that's what opening up a can of whoop-ass feels like. Son, you just opened a whole case of whoop-ass.
This is Ozzy Skateboard, and you're listening to UCY.tv.